I scoured the internet to find the best study tips that will actually help you get straight A's. Here's what I found. Hi guys, it's Andrew and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you can tell by the title of today's video, I'm just going to share the best study and school tips that will actually help you get straight A's in 2024. I have a whole study talk account on TikTok, and basically all I do there is really share study tips. And the way I found these study tips is actually through research and going on the internet. So I've gathered a bunch of the study tips I share on TikTok, and I'm just going to share them all here on YouTube in one complete video. And the whole point of this video is to help you enter your academic weapon era in 2024. So let's just get started. Before we begin, make sure you like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So I have them all on my laptop here, and also just a quick disclaimer, I'm about to share a bunch of study tips, and some of these might work for you, but some of these might not. Everyone's study styles is different, and the point of this video is meant to inform you on the different tips and advice you can utilize, and you can try these out to decide what works for you. But also keep in mind that there might be some tips that might not work for you just because of your study style and preferences. The biggest tip I have for anyone wanting to get better grades and also learn how to study more efficiently is active recall. So what some people do when they study is that they just reread their textbook or go over their notes, and although this might help you, it actually might also take you longer to study because you aren't actively engaged with the material. So instead, what you can do is active recall, and this is where you actively engage with the material by, for example, writing up summaries. You could also use the blurting method, and there's so much more which I will share with you as well. But essentially, active recall helps you study efficiently because by engaging with the material, you're more likely to understand these concepts, and because you are engaged and working with the material, you're able to remember these concepts for longer as well. So I'm going to go over a couple of the best active recall methods just so you get an idea of what I'm trying to say. And these are methods you can utilize in 2024 to make sure you study more efficiently and also hopefully get those better grades. So the first active recall method that I personally use a lot is flashcards. This is pretty self-explanatory, and it's a pretty common study method. But essentially you have a flashcard, and on one side you have a question and on the other side you have the answer. You can do this digitally or physically. I personally prefer to do it digitally now because there are actually a lot of platforms out there. The one I use is Note.io, and they have the technology to employ spaced repetition to help you optimize your studying. So for example, with Note.io, if I get a question wrong constantly, they'll mark it down, and then they'll show more of that question to me instead of the questions that I've already gotten right. And this just helps you study more efficiently because it makes more sense to study the things you struggle with most than study everything even though you've got some of it down already. I'd say flashcards are super helpful if there's a lot of definitions you have to memorize, for example in biology maybe. And I used it a lot when I was learning a second language. Obviously with flashcards you can't use it for other subjects, like for example it's very hard to use flashcards for math. But if there's a lot of memorization involved, then flashcards is definitely a good way to study. Next up we got the blurting method. So basically with this method you are reviewing material from your textbook or your notes, and then you cover up that material and jot down everything you remember and all the important concepts from your textbook or your notes. And essentially you are blurting everything you remember from the textbook, and if there are things that you are missing, you can go back in with a different color pen and jot those down as well, and then repeat this process until you pretty much feel like you've got everything down. I'd say if you're using a textbook, then this method is amazing just because you aren't just rereading the textbook, you're actively engaging with the textbook and keeping track of the important concepts. So that's another method you can implement. The next one, and this is actually one of my favorites, I don't know the name exactly, but I think it's called the feigning technique. And this is essentially where you're teaching someone. So you can pretend to be teaching the concepts of your material to someone who doesn't know anything about this topic. I think this one is great if you have a science class or anything that requires you to explain a concept. And by teaching someone the material, you can identify maybe knowledge gaps that you have with the material, because if there's a part that you're struggling to explain, then that's a sign that maybe you should focus more on that when you're studying. And then next we have creating diagrams and mind maps. This is amazing if you're a visual learner, and especially for science topics, drawing diagrams can be super helpful for understanding a concept. And lastly, we have practice problems. For math, for sure, this is probably the best way to study because practice makes perfect. And it's a great way to test your knowledge because instead of maybe doing the same questions over and over again from a worksheet, you're using new questions, and these are completely new, so you've never done these before, so it's a great way to see if you actually understand what you're doing. For math, I like to find my worksheets online and also YouTube YouTube is an amazing resource. There are YouTube tutorials out there and you can follow along with the questions and see if you're doing the right steps. Okay, now moving away from study methods, here are some other study tips that I wish I knew earlier. The first one that I find is super helpful, especially if you struggle with procrastination, is just put your phone away. This has helped me so much because you aren't distracted by notifications. There are also a bunch of focus apps out there so that you can't go on your phone while you're studying, because I feel like a lot of us get distracted by social media, so by simply having that away, it's harder to be distracted and you can focus more on your studying. On the topic of being focused, another tip that is amazing is actually just not listening to music with lyrics in them. And especially if you're writing papers, listening to lyrics can be distracting because you might mix up the words if you're typing something down. Something that I've been using instead are instrumental versions of songs I like to listen to. And this is super helpful because I can still listen to music but I'm not distracted by the words. Another thing that I've started doing is time blocking. And if you're someone that struggles with time management and occasionally has to pull all-nighters to get something done, one thing that you should try is time blocking. Essentially, you are allocating time to your tasks on your schedule in advance. So for example, you can say from 9 o'clock to 10 you are studying for math, and then from 10:30 to 12 you are working on your math homework. And by planning out your tasks in advance, you can make sure you complete all the tasks you need to do for your day. This is incredibly helpful if you're a busy person and don't know when you'll be able to do your tasks, because you can plan them out in advance. And as long as you're disciplined to your schedule, then this works out really well. Another thing you can do if you struggle with being focused when you're studying is creating a session outline. Essentially, this is where you break down your study session into small achievable goals. For example, if the focus of your study session is to study for a math exam you have coming up, one of your goals can be to learn how to solve for the derivative of a tangent line. The point is to have some specific tasks you can work on, and this makes studying seem less daunting because instead of having this big task you have to do, you're breaking it down into smaller ones that are more achievable. And then next we have the Pomodoro method. Personally, I don't use this method, but if you're someone that struggles with focusing, then this method is actually super helpful. Essentially, you work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and repeat. This is called one Pomodoro. After 4 of these, you could take a 30-minute break, and the nice thing is that there are also timers out there that will help you with this. Alternatively, if you don't like that method, the method I use is called the flowtime method, and it's very similar. However, you don't have scheduled intervals of time to work or to take breaks. It's based off how you're feeling. And personally, I like this method better because you're able to focus on the task for longer. So I don't think 25 minutes is honestly enough time for me to study. But this method relies on you being disciplined or motivated to work. So if you're struggling with procrastination, then this method might not be for you. You might want to try the Pomodoro method instead. Another tip that I found surprisingly helpful is actually having acronyms and mnemonics. That's how you say it. I'm actually not too sure. These are super helpful if you need to memorize concepts. For example, I remember in biology we had to learn something, I think it was the function of life, and there's so many mnemonics out there that helped us memorize this. And the last tip I have for you is probably one of the most underrated tips out there, and it's literally just sleep. Pulling all-nighters is not as beneficial as you think it is, and research shows that sleep actually helps you remember more, and you'll actually be able to focus and absorb information effectively when you're studying. Those are all the tips I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe for more study tips, and I'll see you next time.